Food waste encompasses everything from food that doesn't get harvested in the fields to food that goes to waste because it was a refrigerated truck and the refrigerator broke, to food that gets to the grocery store but isn't sold, to food that you buy, you bring home, it's in the back of the refrigerator, you forget about it, then when you look again, it's got hair growing on it. So food waste is all along the whole food supply chain.
You just heard from a teacher of sustainability at Rutgers University explaining how prevalent food waste is in America. It's easier to understand the scope of the problem if you look at some of the numbers. Natural Resource Defense Council says 40% of the food grown in the U.S. goes unused. Think about that number, 40%. And each year, the average American family of four throws $1,800 worth of food straight into the trash. New Jersey, they're actually trying to do something about this problem, and it's a real one. It begins in the school, Patterson School District. They have a program aimed at reducing waste and also teaching kids some lessons that they could use for life.
School district of this size, of 48 schools, that's about 90,000 pounds of food that was saved that would normally go into a landfill and now is actually being eaten and consumed by these children. The food waste didn't reduce because they chose less vegetables. It was actually because they were consuming the vegetables that they chose. That's what we want them to do, is to eat more fruits and vegetables.
Kids are eating better, eating healthier. They're making choices in their life that will last a lifetime. They make that decision out in the real world from something they learned here in school.
Now, there's a feature piece on NorthJersey.com as we speak that explains just how big a problem this is and also shows how food waste has a huge impact on the environment. The article, it'll also appear in the Record this Sunday. Well, staff writer James ONeill, he penned the piece and he's kind enough to join us in studio now. Jim, thank you for the time. To put our arms around it, I think a couple numbers helped. $1,800 a household, and you know, I think one of the examples in your piece was if you get 5 grocery bags at the store, imagine just leaving 2 in the parking lot and taking the rest home. Obviously, it's not a Jersey problem. This is a national issue, if not global. But we're the worst offenders in America of this, right?
That's right. And actually the largest portion of wasted food ends up in the home. It's people throwing stuff out that they've forgotten about or buying in bulk and not possibly using it all. So that's where the biggest portion of this comes from.
And there's a lot of cost to this. It's not just the $1,800, which I think will jump out at a lot of the viewers and readers, but there is the moral dilemma. You have 40+ million people that go to bed hungry every night in this country, and we're throwing away per household here roughly $2 grand a year in terms of food. You talk about it in the piece that there is a moral cost to this.
That's right. 42 million people go hungry in America, and so if we could save even a third of the food that we're wasting, that would cover the needs of that 42 million Americans. So it's a huge number, and each person individually can really chip away at it with some basic things they can do themselves.
I mean, we're all guilty, myself included. Is it that we buy the wrong stuff, that we're doing impulse buying, or that we don't have a plan what to do with it, and we don't repurpose it in certain ways? Why the scope of how bad the waste is?
Yes to all of those. Many people just go buying without even planning out for the week. If you plan out a schedule of what you're going to make during the course of the week and then have an actual food list and go to the store and buy those things and stick to that list, you're going to do a lot better rather than impulse buying here and there on the way. And then also buying just what you need rather than buying in bulk, because so much stuff is in bulk and you can't possibly use it all. Or think about using your freezer more. You can freeze a lot of stuff and then use it later, or cook in food-sized portions that you can freeze and label them, and then you can pull them out later and use them when you need them. So there are a lot of different things you can do at home.
Now, obviously, it's not just in the home. We'll talk about the bottom lines for business and also the consequences to the environment. But New Jersey's trying to do something about that. We showed a clip that you folks put together at the Record going to the Patterson School District. But people are trying to creatively, I think, either use foods instead of throwing them away for a different purpose, but also making people choose what they want instead of just throwing the whole thing out there, right?
Yeah, there are a lot of different initiatives that people and organizations are doing. We have 7 different stories with videos giving examples. For instance, at Rutgers University, they took away the trays in the cafeterias. That seems like, well, how is that going to help? But in fact, students would, because they had the tray, they could pile up so much food, their eyes are bigger than their stomach, and then they leave a lot of it or throw it out. Now they can only bring to the table what they can actually carry in their hands, which limits the amount of food they're taking with them. Another example is a website called ampleharvest.org, which connects the backyard gardener who might have too many zucchinis or tomatoes growing, can't possibly eat them all or give them to everybody in the neighborhood, and links them to food pantries that could use that fresh produce instead of canned goods and that sort of thing. Another group, Amp Your Good, they have a website where they're kind of reinventing the canned food drive or the food drive. Instead of those canned goods, which aren't nearly as nutritious, people can go online, they can donate, say, $10 worth of fresh apples, and this company will get that food to the food pantry or wherever they're donating the food to. There are a lot of different initiatives. Table to Table is an organization that, using their refrigerator trucks, they'll collect excess food from supermarkets and restaurants and then deliver that to food pantries as well.
So let's work a little Catholic guilt here on the audience. You already talked about the moral dilemma about people going hungry and so much food going into the trash, and we're all guilty of it. But there's also a bottom line cost to companies, and let alone people who are throwing away either profits or at least expenses that they could use far more efficiently. There's also an environmental cost. Talk about methane and how much of a problem wasted food represents. I think New Mexico was one example, is the size of all the wasted food that's thrown out the whole state.
Yeah, so think about the process of how food gets made. Using water, fertilizer, the cropland, all of that is wasted when you're throwing out the food that is the end product. In fact, if you throw out a single hamburger, you're wasting the equivalent of the water used for a 90-minute shower. And you mentioned New Mexico. The cropland used to grow all the wasted food is about the size of the state of New Mexico. So that's all cropland wasted that could have been used for something else or kept natural or used for food that would help somebody. And when food gets thrown out and ends up in a landfill, as it decomposes, it releases methane, which is a greenhouse gas more potent than carbon dioxide. Now, there's one company in northern New Jersey called Ag Choice. They collect food waste, and instead of having it go to the landfill, they turn it into compost or topsoil and can sell it then to people doing landscaping, that sort of thing.
We talked about some of the costs associated to it. Now, people have said forever, don't waste food, think of others, etc. There have been different campaigns in this country for different issues, and 2 come to mind on the driving side. One, seatbelts were always just a recommendation until there was click it or ticket, and there was a penalty associated. The same thing with drunk driving, the idea that, not that it was romanticized, but it wasn't seen to be the huge toll that it really is until we had a major campaign and also crackdown. Do we, in your opinion, have to go from making this a recommendation to making this a mandate, that there's some penalties associated somehow? I don't know how it would work, but instead of asking people not to do this, telling them there's a cost if they don't.
In fact, the EPA set a goal, the Federal Environmental Protection Agency, a couple years ago to have food waste cut in half by the year 2030. And some states are following that as well. New Jersey last year put it in that as a goal too, and the state is creating a plan to try and get to that goal. They're going to release it later this summer. Some states have already instituted restrictions. So if you're a large producer of food waste, like a hospital or a college campus or a prison, you can't have your food waste go to a landfill, you have to have it composted. And then they ratchet down the size of these institutions affected over time. There's legislation in New Jersey is looking at to potentially do the same thing. So there are things starting to get in place that to try and address this.
I suggest you folks really check out all these stories that have been listed on the record. We put both the URL there on your screen and where to go to check it out, and also some of the alternatives here, because there's a better solution here than just throwing stuff in the trash, as hopefully you've gotten. Tim, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And up next, in another week filled with bad news, what we wanted to do was end with some good news. These 3 kids did what most people wouldn't. We'll explain what, and also we'll hear from the kids themselves.